Hi, welcome to the review of the Journal of Distance Education.
I'm Ty Griffiths, project manager.
Brandon Luke.
And Eric Young. In our presentation, we are discussing the Journal of Distance Education. This journal began in 1986 and was intended as a forum where Canadian researchers can contribute completed research, research in progress, and discussions about the research topics. It is sponsored by Mount Royal University of Alberta, as well as by the Canadian Network for Innovation in Education. This is an open journal in that you are able to access and download articles for free and without any particular affiliation. It is, however, still a peer-reviewed journal. Again, the vast majority of the review board are from Canadian universities. During our 10-year range, the journal published 101 articles in English and 102 articles in English and 26 in French. For this slide, we've selected only the top 6 authors and only those who have 3 or more publications. They represent roughly 5% or less of the total authors. In this slide, we've listed authors according to a medal system in which being the first author in an article, you receive 3 points, second article, 2 points, third author and beyond, just 1 point. As you'll notice, in all respects, it's clear that Annie Jezigu is the top author in this journal, given that she is at the top of each of our rankings. After Jezigu, however, the distinction between author rankings is less clear, with Barber, Moisey, Ali, and Carter, who each have authored 3 articles, and Cleveland Hines has authored 4. However, Barber and Moisey are only the second author on one of their articles, and Ali is the third author in one of his. Carter has also authored 3 articles, though she is the first author for one of them and second author for 2 more. Cleveland Hines is a little bit more interesting case because she has a score similar to that of the aforementioned authors. However, none of those points come from being the first author. She is the second author on 3 articles and the third on a 4th article. So while there is no clear line between author rankings aside from Jezigu, the top 6 here are Jezigu, Barber, Moisey, Ali, Carter, and Cleveland Hines.
Getting into the methods, from here you can see that the journal as a whole, over the past 10 years, was mostly interpretive and then theoretical following that, and then inferential. And as we move forward, there's kind of an interesting relationship that we'll see between interpretive articles and then theoretical. This slide here kind of just reconfirms what we saw earlier, that most the articles on average were interpretive articles, 4.3 on average of each publication being interpretive. This is where it gets a little interesting. The first thing you'll notice right off the bat is that huge spike there in 2010, and most of which were theoretical articles that year. There were a lot more articles published that year in 2010, 20, but 12 of them were theoretical. Going back, looking over what the articles actually had in their titles and what they covered, e-learning was in almost every title, which isn't very surprising given that this is a journal of distance education. But the other key phrase that was in almost every title was project management or management of some kind. Obviously, this year there was a huge focus on management, though we're not exactly sure why. Another interesting note is the interpretive articles. There's tends to be this cycle of a downward decline over a few years, and then a huge spike that jumps it back up to a higher number, and then it just declines after that. And so, even with that, and considering all that, interpretive still remains usually the most method used in the journals. Aside from years 2010 and 2012, where it was beat by theory in 2010 and then inferential and theory in 2012. And this breaks it down into the years, exactly what happened, and in a little clearer sense. And just as you can see again, interpretive being the dominant article, but then theory following closely. This was the most interesting to us. The difference between English articles and French articles. English authors focused a lot more on interpretive methods, and they also had theory methods used, but they were very interpretive focused. On the other hand, you have French. The French were focused, or they had a lot of articles that were very theoretically, a lot of articles that were theory based, and then as you can see, the French also didn't have any content analysis or other articles, even though there were fewer given French articles.
Okay, now time to move on to the citation analysis. So the most cited articles, so the top dog award goes to dun, 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 Online Course Effectiveness, an analysis of student interactions and perceptions of learning, which had 234 citations, which was published in 2003. And you can go ahead and look at the other lines of the titles of the articles. A couple of things to note is even though that top side article had 234 citations, you may want to notice that it was also published in 2003. So the last one on the list, which was published in 2009, already has 102, even though it's been out for 6 years less. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly Rourke and Kanuka's article catches up to Rovai and Barnum's article. Some other interesting things to note is that all of these authors, you may not recognize them from the author analysis because they didn't exist there. Actually, this is kind of interesting because all of these authors only published once in this journal, even though they are very well respected in the community and have many publications in other journals, with the exception of Liam Rourke, who over this 10-year period has published 2 articles in this journal. Another interesting thing is, if you want to take a second and pause the recording, you can look through the titles and look to see if you can find some of the themes that were among all of the top, the most cited articles. So pause it if you want to do that, because I'm going to blow the secret right now. Okay, so all 5 of the top articles that were most cited deal with some sort of learning communities, whether that's interactions of students in learning communities or exploring group interactions online. All of these tended to deal with that, so that's kind of interesting as well. So the most cited keywords here, the first 3 should not be a surprise: online learning, distance education, and e-learning. The next one is more interesting, and actually it relates to what the most cited articles were referring to with learning communities. These, in this line where there's 15 references, I broke it down to what each of the keywords actually were in the articles, and none of these are repeats in the articles. That means that there were 15 separate articles that talked about these things. And then the last 2 keywords that were most cited, instructional design and educational technology, were also shouldn't be anything that surprises us in this. One thing to note as well is that the keywords actually came from the journal itself. However, the journal did not include keywords for 10% of the articles. So this is consistent of 90% of the articles that we have. So the abstract analysis. So same thing here. There's not much excitement that we can see. Jumping down to the 3rd line, community of, and then for actually these, this data came from the abstracts, and we got it by analyzing the most common 2 words and 3-word expressions. So pretty much the same thing we've already said. However, if you notice, there's also an element of project management, which in the 2010 year that was referenced earlier, that had the high spike in theoretical, a lot of those were project management types of articles. So it's kind of interesting. So to close, you can pause it and read these conclusions, but we're going to move on. So if you want to read them, go ahead and pause it. And finally, these are some questions for you to consider. Please go ahead and take a second and pause it, read through these questions, and we would love to hear your feedback below. Or if you have other feedback or things that you'd like to say, that's great. Thank you for viewing.